Thank you, Liron. Did Adam Evans arrive? Yeah, okay. So the next speaker is Adam Evans, VP of Innovation Security Services at RBC. He's a member of the senior management team that operates risk and security services for RBC. In this role, Adam is responsible for information security services that include security operation, threat intelligence, defensive threat operations, security tooling and integration, and access administration for the bank globally. In addition, Adam is responsible for the strategy and execution of security operation and threat mitigation activities for the bank globally.
Okay, thank you for having me this afternoon. So, Adam Evans, I run, as was indicated in the introduction, I run security operations, and I've been doing it for about 7 years at 2 separate financial institutions in Canada. Have built up the teams that look for threats across the enterprise's infrastructure as well as our applications, and provide threat intelligence services to make sure we're tuning our defenses to mitigate threats that are targeting our organization. So for the questions I was going to tackle today was how are attack profiles changing with regards to the financial sector in Canada? How are security budgets changing and where are we spending our money? What are we seeing ahead on our threat landscape and what are the new capabilities that we're going to need to build out over the course of the next 2 or 3 years? So it's not going to be a surprise to anybody in the room that obviously the threat landscape is changing. The entry into the cybercrime world is becoming cheaper and it's requiring less knowledge by the attackers to enter into the cybercrime landscape. In 2010, we started to see the proliferation of exploit kits and commoditized threat attack tools that were being incorporated by attackers. They were building out attack capabilities. And the entry into that ecosystem became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and the knowledge required became less and less. When they started to get into 2015 and 2016, what we started to see was a consolidation of those attack tools into hosted services and the emergence of crime as a service. With the breach data that's been made available since really the target breach, there's been mass amounts of information that the bad guys have access to that they're also using to socially engineer companies like RBC and our customers. And our companies are exceedingly growing their digital footprint on the internet and how we interact with our customer base, and it's accelerating, it's getting bigger, and we're doing more business online. So what we're doing is essentially creating a perfect storm for the cybercrime element in the environment, and it's making it harder and harder for us to determine where the attacks are coming from, what are the tools that they're using, and make sure that our defenses stay adaptive to the different types of tools and techniques that the bad guys are using against us. So we started to put together a timeline of what we thought the critical events were, and I get that the text is a little hard to read. We're trying to fit everything into one slide, but I think essentially what we're talking about here is when we started in 1990, the knowledge required by an attacker to do something against an organization, they had to have fairly good knowledge about what they were doing. As we've kind of moved across the timeline, the sophistication of the attacks is increasing, but the knowledge required to carry them out is decreasing. And the cost associated with delivering those attacks against organizations is decreasing as well. So as we move across this timeline, you can see in 2010, you've got cryptocurrency that comes onto the landscape, making it very easy for attackers to collect payment for malicious activities. Then you get into this attack lifecycle that was mentioned in a previous presentation, which is people are phishing organizations for information, they're phishing our customers, they're phishing our employees, they're adding to their data sets, they're leveraging breach data. Leveraging breach data. They're weaponizing different types of malware and delivering that to our organization through a couple of different channels, right? They're using email and they're using web browsing primarily as their threat vectors to compromise the organization. Once they've exploited the organization in some way, shape, or form, then they're able to deliver other pieces of malware that they can use to perform different activities, but the end state is to gather information that they can enumerate into cache in some way, shape, or form. So once we've set the threat landscape, which is the velocity of attacks is getting faster, the cost to launch those attacks is getting cheaper, the knowledge to facilitate those attacks is getting, there's less of a requirement to be a knowledgeable attacker. It requires us to sit back and really think about how we want to protect our organization and what do we want to do from a security budget perspective and where do we want to sink our money in. So cyber incident cost is obviously one of those things, which is a reactive security activity. Once we've been compromised, we need to be able to go clean up and make sure that that attack doesn't happen again. Security technology investment is really around the concept of cyber resiliency. And again, I've sat through a few presentations today, and we're talking about proactive security, building adaptive defenses to make sure that our defenses are always in lockstep with a changing security landscape. Requires time, requires effort, but more than anything, it requires threat intelligence. And it requires threat intelligence to be delivered in a timely fashion and be orchestrated and distributed to the security controls in our environments as quickly as possible. So the more adaptive the defense capabilities are of the organization, the harder it is for the attackers to compromise your organization. They may get through once, but the resiliency part is that we lock the door, we don't let them through a second time to run rampant within our environment. User awareness training is another area that we've focused on and educating not only our users, but our customer base. In the financial sector, part of the responsibility of making sure that your finances and your accounts and your information is protected, it's a shared responsibility between the customer and the organization. When you authenticate to our application, that's our responsibility to make sure that that session happens in a safe and secure way. The machine from which you are setting that session up is your responsibility to make sure that the hygiene of that machine is actually in a good place before you establish the session. So the user awareness training, what we have to start to think about is not so much technical responses to user awareness training, but how do we train human beings to be more risk aware, more security aware? It's a very hard problem. We've been trying to do it for 15 years, talk to them about security, and I think we have to change how we are conveying the message around cybersecurity and the types of skills that people are going to need to teach cybersecurity to other people. They're highly complex concepts, and I think we need people that can actually articulate those concepts to people in a way they understand them. Fraud losses is pretty straightforward. Obviously, the more fraud losses we experience, there's reputational impact, but there's also the transaction fraud loss that's a hard dollar impact to our financial organization. And then business disruption. So with things like DDoS, with things like credential stuffing attacks, those attacks create business disruption in our online channels. There's a reputational component to that, as well as the availability of our organization to do business. The more we grow into a digitized organization and we start interacting with our customers online, business disruption becomes more and more of a problem for us. So we are looking at ways, obviously, to build resiliency into our business processes and the underlying or underpinning technologies that support those business processes. And then there's obviously hidden costs and customer relationships and loss of reputation and things like that we have to take into account. So I ended up pulling a SANS report prior to coming over, and the top 5 spending areas for organizations, and this isn't industry specific, this is really across industries, I found kind of interesting, that most organizations are targeting a proactive security model. So they are trying to build a cyber resilience capability within their organization. They are not waiting to get hit before they start implementing security controls. They are trying to build proactive security measures overlaid with threat intelligence feeds that are interoperable and integrated to ensure that those defenses maintain a contextual awareness of the threat landscape and how it's changing. The next one down, obviously, is detection and response. So once there is a breach in your environment, how quickly can you detect and respond to those malicious activities in your environment? And it's a highly critical point because we sink a lot of time and effort into the proactive trying to keep everybody out, but once they've gotten in, do you have the right controls and visibility in place to determine what they're doing inside of your environment, and how quickly can you find them and clean that or take that threat off the table. Compliance and audit activities. In the financial world, compliance and audit has taken on a whole new level of scrutiny and visibility and how we deliver security services as an organization. And it's probably 20 to 30% of our time is actually spent talking to regulators, talking to auditors, and making sure that they actually understand how we deliver security services as an organization. But what's happening is we're taking the operations folks away from what they should be doing, which is running the shop and making sure that we're detecting threats in our environment, and having to explain how we do it to regulators and auditors that have an interest in it. And we need to find a better way to do that because it's impacting our ability to operate our environments. Risk reduction activities, obviously including supplier risk, that's a new flavor of the day for a lot of the regulatory arms and auditors coming into organizations like ours. They want to understand how we are managing our third-party suppliers and risks in general inside of our organization. And then, as I said, end user training and awareness has been a new focal, or has taken on, I think, a new interest inside the organization, because people are realizing that this is a human problem. The weakest link in the chain for us is really the human element, whether it's customers and or employees, and we need to figure out how do we educate them better about what their responsibilities are inside of our organization. So, what new capabilities are we going to be trying to build out this year? So, I think a lot of organizations are, they're either kind of fairly close to where we are in our journey to move from a reactive security organization into a proactive security organization. And what does that really mean? Well, cyber resilience, from my perspective, really means how fast can we detect, respond, and isolate a threat in our environment? And I've given my team a benchmark of 60 minutes. And why 60 minutes? Well, if we can detect and respond to a threat in our organization within 60 minutes, that means lateral movement is probably not an option for the attacker. So if we can isolate the threat and remove the threat from our environment in under 60 minutes, then there's far less risk to the organization, as well as far less cost to go and clean up a material issue within our environment. Very much, it's very hard to do. It's a very hard nut to crack for us, but we've gotten down into the 2 to 3 hour mark, and we're still kind of driving that lower. And part of the equation for us is the timely delivery of threat intelligence into our environment. We need to make our tools smarter because the velocity of attacks that we're dealing with is growing exponentially. The volume of log data and events that are being generated in my environment today are to the tune of 7 to 10 million events per week, or 10 billion events per week. And we have to sort through all of that information to find the little nuggets that are important to us to go and investigate. So the velocity is increasing, and it's increasing by about 30% per year. We need to continue to build our external relationships. So relationships with not just the regulators, but government agencies, law enforcement, other organizations that are tackling the same problems potentially in different ways. Building strategic partnerships and relationships with vendors and understanding what new technologies and capabilities are entering the marketplace, defining what problem set those technologies are going to be solving for us, and then figuring out, do they have an interoperability play in our environment? Because, as I said, what we're trying to do is really automate our capability to detect and respond to threat. That means we need to be able to push out signatures in an automated fashion. We need to be able to ingest and distribute threat intelligence to all of our tools across the environment, and we operate in 37 countries, so it's a very geodiverse organization. There's a lot of complexity to being able to do that, and we need the relationships with the vendor community as well as the intelligence communities to make sure that we're really getting high-fidelity products and intelligence sources. We need to automate our tasks in the SOC, and we've been doing more and more of that. We've created actually a group called Defensive Threat Operations. They are an adjunct team to our threat intelligence services. So they look at the threat intelligence that are coming out of investigations, external intelligence sources, internal intelligence sources, maybe from other areas in our organization like fraud, AML, places like that, and being able to ingest those into some sort of policy orchestration platform. So we want to be able to take that information and create signatures and deploy those signatures out to various types of security controls, whether it's intrusion prevention systems or firewalls or transaction databases looking for fraudulent activity. Those types of things require us to build in automation and to bring intelligence into a place where we can ingest it, automate it, and distribute it in a very, very short period of time. Prioritizing our investments, obviously there's no shortage of places where we could spend money, but analytics is really helping us figure out where the problematic areas of our organization are and hopefully guide us in where we want to spend our dollars, whether it's a technology problem that we're trying to fix, we need more people, or we need to re-engineer some processes to make sure that we can automate some of those business processes and gain more insights and more consistent outputs from the business processes that we employ. And then investing in machine learning and big data. So this, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. We're looking at machine learning and big data, but when I put my security hat on, machine learning provides us with a good and bad situation. As we adopt more machine learning, machines can learn good behavior and machines can learn bad behavior. So we need to have a security framework that allows us to govern how machines are learning in our environment and make sure that those machine learning tools are not being subverted by the bad guys. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, in the big data and machine learning space, certainly for us, and how we want to govern the use of machine learning in our environment. Developing a strong risk-aware culture. We've been very, very fortunate in that we've got very good executive support at the top of our bank to push a risk-aware culture down into the organization. The problem for us is obviously dedicating the people to it, understanding what the curriculum for building a risk-aware culture is really going to look like, and understanding that there is a tool component to it, but there's also a human learning component to it. And I think we've got to figure out how we want to deliver content to people so they really understand the complexity of the problems that we're trying to put in front of them. Sacrificing some client and employee convenience. For a long, long time as a banking organization, we feared the customer impact when we were putting security controls in place because the user experience was deemed to be poor. We've started to kind of get over that hurdle a little bit and understand that this shared responsibility that we have with the customer, if the customer is continually operating in our environment with a machine that has poor cyber hygiene, then it's our responsibility to ensure that that transaction is done in a safe and secure way. And if that's intrusive to the customer, then we're willing to take that on and deal with the customer and make sure we can either actually get them cleaned up or show them that there's a different way to interact with our organization in a more safe and secure way. And then training our employees, obviously social engineering attacks, always part of the overall attack landscape that we deal with. So user awareness training, phishing campaigns, those kinds of things we're using to train our employees. But I think this problem is getting out and meeting with the employees, putting the content in front of them, socializing with them, breaking it down in a way that they can understand it will be far more effective about how we protect ourselves against social engineering in the years to come, because the attacks are only going to get more complex. So what I decided to do is kind of put together a cyber resilience roadmap and kind of demonstrate the road that we're on. And it's been a maturation phase for us. We've been going for about 3 years, really in the security operations world. And obviously we started out with everybody else. We had lots of security tools. We put in a SIM. We started generating rules for it and alerts. And we started then to bring in things like integrated threat intelligence. We started to build out incident response capabilities, integrate our AppSec programs, which gets us into this integrated framework phase. We're currently at phase 3, which is moving more towards proactive security and building out an adaptive defense capability. And the last phase here is really a complex phase to go through because it requires significant investment. It requires a high level of skill to execute. And you have to go through the first 3 phases of maturity before you can really leverage getting into big data, automated threat intelligence, forensics, all of that kind of stuff. So this has been a maturation for us. It's going to be probably a 3 to 5 year process for us. And then once we kind of get towards phase 4 there, then I think we're going to be able to start getting into policy orchestration, automated defense, integration of security tools, contextual awareness, those kinds of things. So what do we see ahead on the threat landscape? Obviously, ransomware is not going anywhere anytime soon. The bad guys have figured out that it can be highly lucrative. I don't really see that changing in the near future. I think business email compromise attacks, we see it every day, all day long. We're probably 170 or 180 million messages delivered into our bank on a monthly basis, and we drop 85% of that traffic because it's either spam or bad traffic. So these guys are leveraging the email channel to try to subvert the organization, and I don't see that going away anytime soon either. And then I think last year, obviously with the Bangladesh bank heist, looking at things like SWIFT, we're going to start to see more and more business process compromise attacks that are going to be going after large value transfer systems, SWIFT, really core business core business processes and tools to try to subvert the organization, because they were never designed with security in mind. They were designed for a business process perspective, to be able to move large amounts of funds between financial organizations. And I think that is it. So I had 1 minute left. And I put questions up there, but nobody's been asking questions today, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you.